Cultivating the ability to shift modes requires that we learn how we can be fully present right here, right now, whatever the here and now presents to us. Sounds good, except for one thing. Much of the time, if things are not going our way, we don't really want to be in the present moment. We want to be somewhere else, anywhere else. What is more, much of the time, it is not so easy to focus our attention on the present moment, even when we attempt it. Our minds tend to be all over the place, leaping chaotically from topic to topic like monkeys leaping from tree to tree through the jungle. The mind seems to have a mind of its own. Simply waking up to that fact can be an important discovery. But then what do? How can we train the mind to be less scattered and more present, even when it is at the mercy of so many distractions, even in the face of strongly unpleasant circumstances or stress? In a time-honoured story set in an ancient Himalayan kingdom, a novice monk was excited at the prospect of meeting his teacher for the first time. He was on fire with questions, but sensed that this was not the time to ask them. Instead, he listened carefully to the teacher's instructions. They were brief and to the point. Get up early tomorrow and climb to a cave you'll find at the top of this mountain. Sit from dawn to dusk and have no thoughts. Use any method you wish to banish thought. When the day is over, come and tell me how it went. At dawn the next day, the novice found the cave, made himself comfortable, and waited for his mind to settle. He thought that if he sat long enough, it would become blank. Instead, his mind was crowded with thoughts. Soon he started to worry about failing the task he'd been set. He tried to force the thoughts out of his mind, but that just produced more thoughts. He shouted at them to go away, but the words echoed noisily in the cave. He jumped up and down, held his breath, shook his head. Nothing seemed to work. He'd never known such a bombardment of thoughts in his life. At the end of the day, he climbed back down, completely dispirited, wondering what his teacher's response would be. Perhaps he'd be dismissed as a failure, unsuitable for further training. But the teacher just burst out laughing at the tale of his mental and physical gymnastics. "Very good. You have tried really hard and done well," he said. "Tomorrow you should go back to the cave, sit from dawn to dusk, having nothing but thoughts. Think of anything you like all day long, but allow no gaps to occur between your thoughts." The novice was really pleased. This would be easy. He was bound to succeed. After all, having thoughts is what had been happening to him all day. The next day saw him climbing up with confidence to his cave and taking his seat. After a little while he realized that all was not well. His thoughts started to slow down. Occasionally a pleasant thought would come to mind and he would decide to follow it for a while, but soon it dried up. He tried to think grand thoughts, philosophical speculations, to worry about the state of the universe. Anything. He started to run low on things to think about, and even got a little bored. Where had all his thinking gone? Then he noticed gaps in his thinking. Oh dear, this was what he'd been told to avoid. Another failure. At the end of the day he felt pretty wretched. He'd failed again. He climbed down the mountain and went to find his teacher, who burst out laughing again. "Congratulations! Wonderful! Now you know how to practice perfectly." He didn't understand why the teacher was so pleased. What on earth had he learned? The teacher was pleased because the novice was now ready to recognize something of real significance. You cannot force the mind, and if you try to, you won't like what comes of it. There's no need to climb to the top of a mountain to come to this important conclusion on your own. You might like to try this simple experiment right now. If you want to, pause this program for a minute and try to think anything you like, but try not to think of a white bear. 1 minute, make sure that during that minute no thought or image of that animal occurs to you. What did you find? Most people find they can't completely suppress thoughts of white bears. Professor Daniel Wegner and colleagues have shown that when we try to suppress thoughts like this, what we resist persists. Our attempts to force the mind can rebound in exactly the opposite direction from the one we want. Not only is it difficult to suppress the thought in the first place, but later, if we're allowed to think of white bears, the thought of them comes up more often than if we'd not been trying to suppress them earlier. If this is true for neutral thoughts and images such as bears, it's not difficult to imagine what happens when we try to suppress negative thoughts, images, and memories of a very personal nature. If we've experienced persistent low mood in the past, we're likely to put a lot of mental effort into keeping negative thinking at bay. Research by Drs. Wenslaff and Bates and colleagues shows that this can work for a little while, but at a huge cost. Those who put more effort into keeping negatives out of mind end up being more depressed than those who do not. How can we possibly steady and calm the mind if force is so ineffective? All is not lost. The mind has a natural mechanism for supporting sustained, vigilant, engaged attention. The question is, how can we tap into it? One way is to give ourselves the gentle challenge of intentionally focusing and refocusing our attention on a single object. Historically, many different objects of attention have been used, from a gently flickering candle flame to a sound such as Om repeated silently in the mind. Research has revealed that intentionally focusing on just one object in this way can steady the mind by activating the brain networks corresponding to the chosen focus of attention, and then at the same time inhibiting the brain networks corresponding to competing demands for attention, without any need for force. It's as if the brain lights up the selected object while also dimming down the unselected objects. To take advantage of these basic natural processes, we do actually need to make an effort, but it is a certain kind of gentle effort. We direct the spotlight of our attention onto our chosen object, and then refocus the spotlight on the object over and over again whenever we notice it has drifted away. This is very different from the goal-oriented striving that tries to steady the mind by forcing certain thoughts into the mind or pushing other thoughts out, or by erecting a barrier to the entry of unwanted thoughts and feelings. It is a graceful and gentle kind of effort that signals a shift to a mental mode that supports curiosity, interest, and a tendency to explore and investigate. It is tapping into the mind's capacity to approach rather than avoid situations. Traditionally, this harnessing of the mind's own natural capacities for calm and clarity is nicely captured by the image of a glass of muddy water. As long as we keep stirring the water, it'll stay opaque and cloudy. But if we have the patience to simply wait, the mud will eventually settle at the bottom of the glass, leaving clear, pure water above. In the same way, our attempts to steady, calm, or control our mind often merely stir things up and make everything less clear. But we can get out of our own way and stop contributing to the cloudiness of the mind by encouraging it to alight and dwell on a single object of attention for a time. When we intentionally let go of our urge to force things to be a particular way, the mind naturally settles all by itself, leaving us both calmer and clearer. From ancient times, the breath has served as a convenient object for this purpose. The intention is to attend as best we can to the constantly changing pattern of physical sensations as the breath moves in and moves out of the body. You might like to try this first mindfulness of breathing practice now if you're in a position to do so. If not, try it a little later. Guidance for this practice is given on track 4 of the guided practice session. It's remarkable and inspiring to think that the practice of focusing on the breath in this way has been followed somewhere in the world every day for at least the last 2,500 years. It provides a wonderful foundation for the practice of meditation. Our breathing is with us wherever we go. We can't leave home without it. It is always available to help us reconnect our attention to the present moment. Learning to focus, refocus, and refocus our attention on the breath offers a great way to learn how we can be fully present right here, right now. Because we can attend to the movements of the breath only in the very moment in which they are arising, attending to the breath holds us in the present and provides a vital anchor line with which we can reconnect to the here and now when we recognize that our mind has travelled far away to the there and then. Maintaining a focus of awareness on the breath as the mind is pulled away by thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, or external distractions is not easy. But it may seem less of a struggle when we are able to see such fluctuations in the mind as just what the mind does, similar to waves on the surface of water. If we see these mind waves as both natural and inevitable, then the very going away and coming back of our attention can be seen as the heart of the practice, not a lapse or a deviation or a distraction from it. For such goings and comings can teach us precisely what we need to learn: to recognize when we have drifted into doing mode, to disengage from any doing if we choose, and to enter and dwell in being. This tendency of the mind to wander is perfectly normal. The fact that our thoughts seem to proliferate without end doesn't at all reflect an inability to meditate on our part. In fact, this recognition of the ever-changing nature of our own thought stream and how labile our attention is marks the beginning of meditative awareness. All the same, it's very easy to become fidgety in the face of the unrelenting torrent of thoughts and think that we must be doing something wrong. It's only natural to think that the work of meditation is being interrupted when the mind wanders here, there, and everywhere. Yet, each moment in which the mind takes off gives us one more opportunity to become more aware of when we are slipping, or have already slipped, out of the being mode and back into the doing mode. It allows us to become more aware of the thoughts, feelings, and body sensations that carry us away in those moments, and to cultivate the skills of releasing ourselves from the doing mode and returning to the more mindful being mode. This is why the instructions for the mindfulness of breathing practice encourage us to congratulate ourselves at first when we notice our awareness is no longer on the breath. In that very moment, it can be helpful to note briefly what is on our mind and name what is going on. So we could say to ourselves, for example, thinking, thinking, or planning, planning, or worrying, worrying. Whatever the content of the thought or impulse, the task is the same: to note what is on our mind in this moment, and then to gently escort our awareness back to our breathing, renewing our contact with the in-breath or the out-breath, whichever is happening when we come back. Just like anything else, meditation can all too easily be taken on in a doing mode of mind. Perhaps having experienced the turbulence in the mind abating a bit on its own on a few occasions, we may find ourselves expecting it to happen every time we sit down to meditate. We can't help asking ourselves, if we experienced calmness last time, why not now? Unwittingly, we have slipped into becoming goal-oriented in the meditation practice. It's very common to have a feeling that we've got it in certain moments, that this must be what I am really supposed to be feeling, only to feel at other moments that we've lost it, maybe even in the very next moment. This is not a problem at all, especially if we can be aware of it and smile inwardly at the unending antics of our own doing mind. But once we have felt a sense of peace, even for the briefest of moments during a session of practice, the doing mind's habitual tendency to look for goals naturally kicks in. It generates the expectation or hope that we will have the same experience in the next moment or the next time we do the practice. And if that experience doesn't repeat itself according to our expectations, how easily we can feel disappointment and irritation. And even if we recognize the expectation and the irritation, we can still easily feel critical of ourselves for getting irritated. We may even wind up thinking that the experienced meditators never feel irritated as we generate endless fantasies and idealizations about meditation. If irritation arises in any moment, we can simply note it as irritation, labeling it as a way of acknowledging it for what it is. Then we can gently direct our attention back to the breath. So, when practicing mindfulness, if we slip back into the doing mindset, thinking that the meditation is not working or that we are doing it wrong, it can be very helpful to remind ourselves that cultivating mindfulness of breathing or any other object of attention is fundamentally a practice of beginning again and again and again each time we are caught up and carried away by the wanderings of the mind. Through repeated practice, we come to see that each in-breath is a new beginning, and each out-breath a fresh letting go. We begin to see that the shift from one mode of mind to another can be virtually instantaneous. In this way, the practice is always giving us the chance to begin again in this moment with this breath. If our mind wanders 100 times during a period of formal practice, then we simply and good-naturedly bring it back 100 times. Eventually we may come to see what this practice is actually asking of us, to recognize and accept that our mind does indeed have a life of its own, and that it will inevitably wander away from whatever object of attention we set for ourselves, in this case the breath. And we may come to see that we can gently escort our attention back to the breath every time this happens. Ultimately, we come to see that we can cradle all of it in awareness with a light and gentle touch, including the wandering of the mind with all its obsessions and its struggles. Just that. And that is a lot. Perhaps everything. We are beginning a graceful transition from unawareness to awareness.